Commercial agriculture part 4 is what we're starting today, and we're going to start with a little review, and then we're going to talk about a unique type of agriculture. First of all, with the review, very important to review this stuff, very important to know these notes we've been talking about. We talked about 3 kinds of subsistence agriculture. Subsistence is where you're farming on a small scale. You're farming probably in a stage 2, maybe a stage 3 country. It's what American farms used to look like 100 years ago, most of them, or maybe in East Tennessee 60 years ago. You probably have lots of different kinds of animals, but not a lot of any kind of animal, if that makes sense. Maybe a few chickens and a cow and a pig, maybe a few pigs, but you probably grow a little bit of a lot of things. Subsistence agriculture is done for your family. It's done to provide for yourself. It's not global in nature at all. It's just about survival. It's very connected to folk culture, all that kind of stuff. We'll be talking more about that and Esther Boserup here in a couple days. 3 types of subsistence agriculture are shifting cultivation, that's slash and burn, pastoral nomadism, herders, and intensive subsistence agriculture, which is mainly in Asia today, wet rice dominant and not dominant. When I say those and you see those, if you don't know what those are and you don't know what kind of things they grow and you don't know how they grow them and the process and you don't know where they're at on the map, that's part of today's assignment. You should have already known that by earlier in the week. I know this is challenging, though, and I know we got to rethink the way we do everything. So please study where these are. Watch the video I posted earlier in the week, too, as a supplemental video where the other guy who's an AP Human Geography teacher takes you through these types of agriculture. Those are the 3 types of subsistence agriculture. Now, let's look at what we have studied with commercial agriculture. We've looked at mixed crop and livestock. That's where you grow a lot of corn and grain and you feed it to the pigs and cows and fatten them up in the feedlots, and that's where a lot of our meat come from. Commercial farms, remember, are about making money. They're about cash crops. They're about being productive. They're run often by businesses and corporations. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Dairy farming. Those are dairy farms in the United States used to be spread out throughout the country, dispersed. Now they're more clustered in California and around the Great Lakes. Think about why that is too. If you've got dairies near the Great Lakes and in California, you basically can get milk to most Americans in a very short amount of time. Because think about how many Americans live in the East Coast and on the West Coast. And you got them covered with those 2 zones. Grain farming. You also have to know, by the way, these on a world scale. We're going to be looking at some world maps probably more tomorrow on a video. But grain farming is the American Midwest, Great Plains is the better one. Heartland, that's Kansas, Oklahoma, North and South Dakota, those areas. Livestock ranching. Remember, the grain farming, we do eat a lot of the food that comes from there. The mixed crop and livestock, we eat the meat, not necessarily not vegetables, but the crops grown. Livestock ranching, that's out near the Rocky Mountains and to the east of that. We talked about that yesterday. And then Mediterranean agriculture is the agriculture that comes off the coast of California, Chile, France, Mediterranean area, South Africa. Very unique climate. This is where grapes and nuts and some other fruits and vegetables with irrigation can be grown. And then truck farming or fruit and vegetable farming, commercial fruit and vegetable that we have a mixture of here in this area, does not take a lot of land. It's more intensive. They need good land, but it doesn't take a lot of land. And so with that, they're able to produce high profit yielding fruits and vegetables, Florida, orchards, all that. They're able to produce those that the middle class wants and is in high demand, especially with the healthy nature of eating these kind of crops. So that's a quick review. Our brand new type of agriculture to talk about today is one that kind of goes against the grain. So far, I've told you that subsistence farms, those 3 we talked about, shifting or pastoral nomadism, intensive subsistence, look in stage 2 and 3 countries to find them. Your commercial farms, look in stage 4 and 5 countries. Here's the exception to the rule. Okay, note this. Exception to the rule. Plantation farming is a commercial type of agriculture. In other words, it is done for money making. But it takes place in mostly LDCs. LDC stands for less developed country, stages 2 and 3s. You have heard of the word plantation, and it fits perfectly for early America. The slaves that worked on the plantation in the Deep South. Some of you may have visited old plantations before. Okay? That is exactly the model of a farm this is talking about. What did they grow on those plantations in the South? Cotton, tobacco, maybe sugar cane in the islands, but they were monocropping. Look, monocropping means you are specializing on one crop. It's like factory farming, which actually that's kind of what this is. That's another name for it, actually. And so they're trying to be experts at growing one crop and then sell it to the world. So that's what used to be in the South in the United States. We really don't have that anymore. Where we have it now is in Africa, Central America, South America, and some parts of Asia. And the reason that we have it in those places is wealthier people in those countries or in other countries around the world, America, somewhere like that, are buying cheap land or cheaper land in these locations where the climate and the vegetation allows them to grow crops you can't grow in Europe and the United States. So it's an economic decision. They can make a lot of money. Rubber comes from trees. There's a certain kind of tree, it's called the rubber tree, but there's a certain kind of tree that you can only really find in Southeast Asia. There's a few other places, but mostly Southeast Asia. So people are buying up hundreds of thousands of acres of these rubber plantations, and they're just producing rubber off of them, and they're monopolizing the market, so to speak. Same thing about growing bananas, banana plantations, sugarcane plantations, tobacco plantations, used to be cotton plantations, tea plantations, coffee plantations. Those crops can only be grown in certain locations. So wealthy people will buy big swaths of land and then they'll mass produce these crops. Now think about it. A lot of times these wealthy owners of plantations are from rich countries. Not all the time, but sometimes. Maybe they're government officials or friends of the government. Who do you think they hire to do the manual labor on these plantations? They hire the locals. So the local people are doing the work on the plantations, getting paid very little. Many of you may remember our last day in class, we talked about core, periphery, and semi-periphery. So this would be a periphery type activity. In other words, it's happening to extract a raw material or a farming product from the land, but where do you think the sugar cane, the cotton, the coffee, and the rubber, where's most of it going? It's not staying in Malaysia. It's not staying in Colombia. It's going to the United States of America. It's going to Germany. It's going to Japan. That's the type of agriculture we're talking about, modeled exactly like the original plantations in the United States, okay? Modeled exactly like those. But it's in LDCs. Again, this is plantation agriculture. There definitely are concerns. Notice the economic concerns. People oppose this kind of agriculture because they believe it's exploitive, that it's taking advantage of poorer countries and sending stuff to richer countries. It kind of works like a lot of our factories do, like that make T-shirts and socks these days. You know, and how those things are all wove together in the world economy. Bangladesh is making a lot of clothes that's being sold in America. By the way, if you haven't saw this, during the coronavirus, I saw a report the other day that Bangladeshi workers, Bengali workers, almost a third of them have already lost their jobs because the demand in the rich world is not there right now as the economy suffers through what's going on and the shutdowns. And so they've laid off workers there because what are they producing for? They're producing for a global economy, right? So the global economy is huge here. Another issue people criticize about plantation agriculture is the environment. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the people who run these plantations know that in these poorer countries, they can get away with more things such as contaminating the soil, the water supply, dumping waste products, stuff like that. So that is also a concern with plantation agriculture. Here is some pictures. Plantation agriculture mostly is about monocropping. In other words, specializing in mass producing a lot of one thing. Sometimes you might get two things or some double cropping, but it's usually about monocropping. This is a banana plantation. Can't see the bananas, but you can see the trees. Central America, obviously prominent for that. They sell them to America and other places. And here is a more full-length description of plantation farming, large farms where crops are grown that are going to be sold probably far away. Think about even when America had plantations. The cotton we were growing, most of it ended up in Europe. Again, slaves historically were used to work on these farms. Now it's mostly local labor, native population. Again, the advantage that these crops can be sold to make money instead of just for food or for the farmer's family. In other words, these are cash crops. Cash crops are crops sold to profit. With a large acreage, there can be high production, relatively cheap labor, and they can produce efficiently. This is the answer to the question, what kind of commercial farm is most likely found in a less developed country? Plantation agriculture. Again, some other characteristics just repeated. I think we've already used all these. Chemical fertilizers, though, insecticides and pesticides are used. Also, a lot of machinery will be used, but labor intense, some parts of it are labor intensive. There's some things with a lot of these crops you've got to do by hand. So again, where are these plantations in the world? Blow this up a little bit for you. You shouldn't be surprised. You should be able to map this yourself. Look at the places where plantation agriculture is in play. Matter of fact, a lot of Americans have bought land in Mexico and have set up plantations. Not the rich world, but the less developed, poor world, and also where land is cheaper. And it gives you some of the specifics there. So please study this. This is, again, the last type of commercial agriculture, although it takes place in LDCs, less developed countries. All right, we're going to shift just a little bit. In our next discussion, we need to talk about some other terminology. All right, we need to talk about some other terminology related to commercial and subsistence agriculture. Let me pull this up here. And here are some terms you must know. If you look at the screen, we've been talking about the first four: extensive, intensive. For example, if you're growing something that requires a lot of land, that's extensive agriculture use. Extensive land use means using a lot of land. Intensive land use means getting the most out of land. Like in the Netherlands, when you did the FRQ that showed that all the buildings were built close together, that's an intensive land use. That the agriculture is made in a way that's intensive because you have to they're growing fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables can be grown in close proximity. That's intensive land use, okay? Perishable products, milk, fruits and vegetables. Geography is important because those things do rot and you can't have them, they can't keep forever. Grain, bread, stuff like that, not a perishable product because it can keep for a long time. Cash crops, crops that make money. Now, sustainable agriculture. Commercial agriculture is done for making money. We've talked about that. We're going to talk more about some of its characteristics. First of all, commercial agriculture, and you need to know this in your notes, the biggest positive of commercial agriculture in our world today, because it gets a black eye a lot, but the biggest positive is it mass produces tons of food. The United States is one of the best examples you're going to find. We have enough food to feed this country and 30 plus others at least. Commercial agriculture has saved the world from potential famines and massive starvations at times. So although there are legitimate criticisms of commercial agriculture, you must understand how that the use of machines and better ideas from the Green Revolution have allowed us to produce more food in a way that subsistence farming can't. So that's a big positive. Another positive you have to know about commercial agriculture, these are the two big ones, is it is cost efficient for consumers. Because commercial farmers are able to produce so much, so quick, demand or supply goes up, which means demand goes down and prices go down. Commercial agriculture has made food cheaper. America pays for the lowest grocery prices in the entire world. Contrast that with Japan, who pays high grocery prices. They don't have a lot of farmland, and the government wants to protect their farmers, so the Japanese government puts big tariffs on imported food, which means they pay a lot more for groceries than we do in America. So commercial agriculture provides us with lots of food at a relatively cheap price. That's the bottom line, okay? And by the way, a side note here that I think something you should find interesting, the old saying goes, you get what you pay for. In food products, that's pretty much true. Commercial farming can mass produce low quality stuff at a really cheap price. But you're not going to get the quality. If you go to a steakhouse and buy an $80 steak, you're getting a top quality product from one calf. But if you go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac, you're getting hamburger meat parts from hundreds or thousands of different cows that's been all ground together as the leftover edible parts of older animals. That's just the truth of it, okay? And I could give you other stories about that. I may just do one segment on that. Might find that interesting. And it would also help you understand a little bit too. But sustainable agriculture is the idea. We covered sustainability early in the semester. Sustainable anything is stuff that can continue to be done over time and time and time and time again. So sustainable agriculture is agriculture that is not going to harm the environment. One of the biggest criticisms of commercial agriculture is that it is not sustainable. We're using too much water. We're using too many steroids, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to give you a lot of others because you're going to have an assignment today watching some other videos where you're going to give me answers via Schoology on some of the criticisms of commercial agriculture. But positives, cheap prices, mass production. Sustainable agriculture is agriculture that can be done for long term, like growing stuff in a garden where you don't have real steep rows designated so that flooding will not be as bad. Or let's say you're growing something on a hillside, you're going to leave part of the land in grass and then plow some of it and then leave others in grass, because if water starts washing down that hill, that grass will keep it from eroding as much, and you want to leave it sustainable. So sustainable agriculture is, again, about agriculture you can use in the future. The videos you're going to be watching today, called The Matrix, was produced by a sustainable agricultural group of people. They are for sustainable agriculture. Subsistence agriculture in general is more sustainable than commercial. Not always, not 100%, but in general. Other terms you see on your screen: agribusiness. Agribusiness. We need to know what this is, so let's go through a definition slide of it. Give me just a second to pull it up. Agribusiness. Here we go. All right. So what is an agribusiness? Well, agribusiness is basically what we've been talking about with these commercial farms, right? Basically what we've been talking about with these commercial farms. It's agriculture as big business. That's what American farms are today. For the most part, American farms are huge farms. Now, I know in East Tennessee, there's some small farms, some hobby farms and that kind of stuff. And our geography has a lot to do with that. But out in the American Midwest and other areas, it's big business farming. They run their farms like a business. Look, it's the industrialization of agriculture. Synonymous, no agribusiness, but also no factory farming. Factory farming is synonymous with agribusiness. You're running a farm like a factory. You have millions of dollars in equipment, possibly, at least hundreds of thousands. You've got self-driving tractors where you use a remote to tell them what to do. And you are robotics, just like a factory does, to mass produce America and the world's food supply. Not just in America. Europe has it. Japan a little bit. China's getting there. Modern commercial farming. It's dependent on chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. Is that good? Well, it's good for short-term production. There's more questions about the long-term. Oil is required to make the fertilizer, so there's a high demand for fossil fuels. Also concerns about carbon emissions. Also, there's complaints about it being inefficient. Why do we grow stuff to feed to animals? Why don't we just eat it? Why don't we just eat it ourselves? And then the agribusinesses create an economy of scale that the small farmer cannot compete with. Small farmers, these days, the trend in farming in America and rich countries is get bigger or get out. Or just do it for a hobby. You can do that. Small farmers can't afford that big equipment because they don't get the number of product they put on the market. You know how commercial farmers make up for prices going down on their product? Generally, they produce more. What's that do to the price per unit? It keeps going down. Can that small farmer match that? I hope you know the answer to that question. Okay. Fewer than 2% of Americans are involved in agriculture today directly because it's being done as a business. Many of the farm owners today are people who are CEOs with Tyson Foods, for example, or trying to think of some of the other companies out of them, Conagra, right? We got 5 or 6 companies that produce 90% of our hamburger meat or 90% of our pork or whatever you want to call it, right? That's how agribusiness works. So agribusiness, again, one of our terms, it and factory farming are basically synonymous. It's the large-scale farming that now dominates America. Very productive, okay? Causes prices to go down. But there are concerns, including the fact that these factories are making our food instead of us watching it grow in our garden. The last term here is vertical consolidation. Vertical consolidation. The reason this term is important, and we usually cover it in economic geography, but that part's not going to be on the test, but it will be important when it comes to agriculture. Vertical consolidation, and it's having trouble pulling this up here, so I'm going to try to find it at a different location, so give me just a second. But it's a type of practice used in agribusiness, so that's why we're using it. So for your notes, vertical consolidation is a type of practice used in agribusiness. And if I can't find it here, I know where else I've got it. So just hang with me just a minute. Okay, so we'll just do it this way. It's a type of business operation that some of you may be familiar with. And here we go. All right. So if you look here, and let me take maybe a clip of this so you guys can see it better. All right, so if we look at this right here, vertical consolidation is a business tactic. And it's the gaining control of many different businesses that make up all phases of a product's development. You might have heard of something called the supply chain before. What is being shown right here is a supply chain. What is the supply chain for beef in the United States? Well, first of all, somebody's got to raise the cows. And then the cows have to be fattened, and then they have to be slaughtered, and then they have to be packaged, and then they have to be shipped off to warehouses, and then they have to be taken to the meat packing plants, and then they have to be delivered to the stores. That's the supply chain. It's a chain of events that gets the product from the farm to the store. What is happening with agribusinesses these days is they are trying to vertically consolidate the supply chain. Consolidate means bring everything together under one umbrella. So what they're doing is they're trying to, from the field to the store, from the farm to the store, own all of this supply chain. Vertical consolidation, there's also horizontal, that's a monopoly, but vertical consolidation is not a monopoly. Vertical consolidation is legal, perfectly legal in this country. It is when one company says, okay, we're not just going to process meat and have our brand, but we're going to buy the trucking company that hauls the meat to the grocery store. We're also going to buy the train cars that bring the cows to us. We're also going to buy the slaughterhouse that slaughters the cows, and we might as well buy the farm too. What Tyson Foods have done in Arkansas, they bought up most of the chicken farms. So they don't have to pay a middleman. They get all the profits along the way. Everything is under their umbrella of their business. That's what's happening here. It's called vertical consolidation. And so if a company owns every part of this, they get all the profits from it. This is what's happening in all of American business these days, for the most part, but it's happening especially in American agriculture. So that the company that's producing our food, that's marketing our food, also a lot of times owns a lot of our farms. So let me walk you through a test run of what's happened. What has happened is, in America's our Great Plains, America's small family farms have been bought by these big businesses, these agribusinesses. And a lot of times they will then have the farmer who used to work on the farm and live on the farm, if they want to, they'll hire them as an employee. And then they'll have the total means of production to get it from the farm to the store. That, in a nutshell, is vertical consolidation. Vertical because it's up and down, the supply chain. This means buying out all the phases of production from the farm to the store. It also works in other economics too. If you were building cars, then you would buy up all like raw materials, where the raw materials were coming from, the processing, the part making, all the way until you send it out to the lot. That's how this would work. Okay. Another way to think about this is think about buying great value stuff when you go in Walmart. Their version, that's because they own the whole process of producing most of that product. All right. So that is vertical consolidation. Please let me know if you have questions on any of this. That vocabulary is very, very important. I also want to leave you with something else. You're going to be watching, and this should go in your notes. You're going to be watching videos today called The Matrix. There's 3 of them. I think you'll find them maybe entertaining. There'll be another one tomorrow. It's a little weird, but I think you'll think it is. But anyway, you're going to be watching these videos. You're going to respond to these videos on Schoology in a discussion format, and this stuff should go in your notes. These videos you're going to be watching called The Matrix were produced years ago by a group of sustainable agricultural supporters. They don't like commercial farming, let's put it that way. So this is heavy propaganda. Your job in Schoology is to bullet point and list in the discussion thread as many criticisms of commercial agriculture as this group points out in their videos. Watch, have fun with the videos. They are very helpful, and let's see you think. Think through as many as possible. Don't come up with 2 or 3. I want your goal to be 8 to 10 criticisms of today's modern day commercial agriculture.